Marathon County Human Resources Finance Property Committee to order.
And we will call the Extension, Education, and Economic Development Committee meeting to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. We have a number of people that have registered for public comment. Please limit your comments to no more than 3 minutes. If people have covered what you said, you're welcome to say I agree, and then embellish a little bit, but please limit your comments to 3 minutes. We'll start out with Brian Kolich. If you could come forward and introduce yourself and the municipality in which you live.
My name is Brian Kolich, and I live here in Wausau. Ready? Okay. I just want to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Brian Kolich. I serve as the Executive Director of the North Central Wisconsin Workforce Development Board. I'm here to express strong support for relocating the Job Center, which currently is located at 731 First Street in Wausau, to the UW-Stevens Point at Wausau campus. As many of you might know, the building that the Job Center is in, which is across from the YMCA, is going to be demolished and turned into an assisted living facility, and we need space to go to. This seems like a natural fit for us to end up at what used to be the UWMC campus. Each year, the Job Center serves hundreds of Marathon County residents, individuals seeking new employment opportunities, workers upgrading their skills, and employers looking for qualified candidates. These services come at no cost to the public and help strengthen our local economy and improve the quality of life for our citizens. By moving the Job Center to the UW-Stevens Point at Wausau campus, we can expand and impact the community in many positive ways. As the Regional Workforce Board, we see firsthand the difference that these services make for families, businesses, and our broader community. Relocating the Job Center to the campus will ensure that we can continue to deliver those results and do so more effectively for years to come. So I urge the committee to at least consider this plan. And it's more than just a change of address. It's just a way for us to continue working in the community and providing the services that we have done for the past several years. So thank you for your time. That's it.
Thank you. I do want to thank you for raising UWMC in your comments. You beat me to it, and some of us appreciate that.
Sure. Thanks.
Next, we're calling Sarah Rudolph.
Hello, I'm short. Hello, my name is Sarah Rudolph, and I live at 1502 McIndoe Court, Wausau, Wisconsin, where I have lived for 30 years, over 30. And I ran the UWMC theater program for 3 decades. When I arrived, my husband, who was much more familiar with theater facilities, having worked in a wide variety of them, the first thing he said when we went into the old theater was, "Open your employment file now." So obviously I didn't, and we did some great work and had some great support in that auditorium, which still does exist. In terms of the Veninga Theater, I'm very invested in this and very emotional about it. One of the things I learned in my career is that if you complain about something for 20 years, something might happen. And because of Jim Veninga, rest in peace, one of the most wonderful people I've ever met. Because of Jim Veninga, we have not only a new facility, but a new place for public discourse and exchange and interaction. And at its heart, that's what theater is. In a world where most people spend most of their time isolated before screens, theater keeps community and connection alive. That facility is, and I'm trying to remember the word that realtors use when you can just walk in the door, turnkey ready. That facility is turnkey ready. The amount of care and concern, I served as faculty, or as building shepherd. I had no staff that I got to walk around with, but I was faculty shepherd for the entire building project. And I have to say that Chris Berg, who still is a fixture there, was so careful, so smart, that facility, he was making me $10 an hour, and he was fixing the errors and oversights by a man who made over $100,000 as our consultant. He's still there. And part of what I want to urge, you're going to hear from, and I know you've been petitioned by a vast number of the organizations that rely on that space. It was heartbreaking for me that things happened.
You could begin to wrap up.
Okay, that things happened that meant my theater program ended, but that doesn't mean the facility needs to end. So what I really want to do is encourage you to listen to the people who rely on that space, and I also really, really want to emphasize the need to have someone like Chris Berg there to make sure the facility is maintained. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we'll call on Paul Radke.
Thank you for listening to us. I'm Paul Radke. I live in Wausau. I'm the current president of the Wausau Community Theater. I agree with Sarah's comments about Chris Berg. Chris Berg is integral to that theater. Wausau Community Theater's been around for 90 years. And way before I was involved, they performed in many different areas. We used to perform at the Grand for many years. There's no way we can afford to survive with the costs at the Grand. The Veninga has really fit our area quite a bit. And I don't want to plug our show, but if you've really never experienced it, this week, tomorrow, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, you can come see what we actually mean. We've got 36 cast members. They come from Pittsville. Our director's from Marshfield. We have people from Rhinelander that regularly perform with us. Musicians, we've got like over 20 musicians in the pit. All of the crew, it's just brings in a lot of people, and just wanted to make sure you knew that we really rely on that theater. Thank you.
Thank you. James Hawkins.
Good afternoon. Jim Hawkins. I live in Wausau. I've been a stagehand and performer in Wisconsin from Stratford to Oconto, and from Wausau West all the way down to Madison. I've worked in opera houses, I've worked in theaters, I've worked in arenas, and I've got to say that in my experience, the Veninga Theater, from its origin, was one of the best facilities in terms of planning and implementation, with the least number of mistakes, oversights, and monstrosities that other facilities in this community have had. I've worked in just about every theatrical venue in this city, and the Veninga is a fabulous, fabulous facility. But it's only as good as its maintenance. And in terms of maintenance, I would refer you to what has happened to the old East Theater with years of deferred maintenance, cobbled repairs, and it is now a cave, an empty cave, 1,700 seats. It used to be the biggest theater in Wausau, bigger than the Grand. The Grand is a fine theater, but it is busy. It's extremely busy, and it's extremely expensive for community organizations to use. And I'm talking about whether it's for meetings or theatrical pursuits, ballet, whatever. It's just very expensive. Should the county, the UW, the city, perhaps even the state, find some way in order to preserve the facility and keep it maintained so that it isn't, well, everything deteriorates, you know. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. But the maintenance of a theater facility requires careful guidance, careful maintenance, and a really multidisciplinary approach that is not necessarily found in your HVAC maintenance people or your building maintenance people, because a person such as Chris works in multiple languages and multiple disciplines. So it is, I would like to bring the community's attention to the value of that facility and the value of Chrisburg to that facility, because the two are integral to each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Rick Laframbos.
Thanks, Fred, yeah. Brown boy. Vance would know I'm a pesky neighbor. Thank you for having us this morning. We'll keep it brief here, but echoing comments on Chris Berg, his professional expertise is second to none. We've had Rick Laframbos with the Central Wisconsin Children's Theater in Wausau here. We stage all 4 shows of our season there at the Veninga, and we've got to know Chris very well. He helps us elevate our shows. He's the production value is quite high. We've had shows at high school like Moseley when we could get in, when we had a conflict at the Veninga that we couldn't get into the Veninga. That's why we've learned to book more than a year in advance, or as far in advance as we could. That issue will come up early next year. We usually book by February, March the following year, so through 27. So there's an issue with that right now with the WSP not allowing us to book shows beyond May. So we will be looking for some resolution on that as quickly as possible. But the production value at a high school without a professional house manager like Chris, it just is not nearly the same. We've had parents fly, or family fly in for shows from Florida and all over the drive-in from all over the place in the Midwest. And some have actually, I've heard them out loud say, I'll never come to another show again like this. It was at the high school. It didn't have, the mics wouldn't work with our tech equipment. It was just all kinds of bugs. But I didn't stand up. I didn't come to talk about that right now. But the Veninga, really like many in the room, I'm just going to say I'm deeply invested in the future of the UWSP campus as a whole, not only because it's an anchor at the gateway to our downtown, but because it serves as a cultural and educational hub for our entire community, our region. And for CWCT, the Children's Theater, and the dozens of other local arts groups that signed the letter I submitted to the county board, you know, the Veninga is a vital community space that helps our kids, our families, audiences that we connect with through the arts. And there's really no other place for us to go. There just really isn't. Even Patrick and Thriller, they had to have it at the Veninga this year. because there wasn't time at the Grand anymore after decades of holding his Thriller show at the Grand. So as you consider the future of the campus, I ask you to view this facility through the lens of its history. As many of you may know, since it opened in 2010, Marathon County, the county board has been the steward the county has of the property, built with federal, county, and community foundation dollars. So it was a broad range of funders that built that, that really have been stewards of this. So, and thanks to the county for maintaining it all these years. A shared investment really that continues to pay dividends in our quality of life, education, community pride. And I'll just wrap up to say that, keep in mind, especially if and when a proposal comes forward from the arts and cultural groups in town that depend on the Veninga, we're going to be here and welcome the opportunity to be part of the conversation how we move forward with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Parker.
Good evening. Forgive my voice. I caught a little laryngitis, but I feel good. Tim Parker. I live at 6 North Hill Road in Wausau. I'm also the CEO of the Community Foundation of North Central Wisconsin. And another hat I wear is I play in about 6 or 7 of the bands in this community. One of the things that we really love about the Wausau area and all of Marathon County is the arts and culture here for the, if you look at it per capita, we have some of the most amazing opportunities for people in those areas, just as we do with outdoor recreation. We have a lot of nonprofit organizations in the cultural and arts space, and with all of the cuts over the recent period, some of them are becoming fledgling organizations. In order for them to survive, we're gonna have to look at partnership and consolidation. And I'm here to express a strong interest in submitting an RFP for the Marathon Center for Arts and Culture. We're interested in the theater building in North and South Hall, and we see consolidation and partnership in the arts community and in the cultural community organizations such as like Mosaic and New Beginnings, organizations like that. We also foresee possibly an opportunity for workforce to also be part of that. So I think we could partner and make that happen too. There's enough space for us to do it. So we're thankful for the county for maintaining these buildings. We hope that you'll make a decision in the end to continue to use them for public good and with some aspects of education too. I think that wraps up my comments. Thank you.
That concludes the people that had signed up beforehand. Is there anyone else that wishes to make a comment?
Yeah, I think
Go ahead. 3 minutes if you could identify yourself and fill this out after you speak.
My name is Julie Bunchek. I'm a resident of Wausau. And you've all been hearing a lot of stories about the performing arts events that have happened in the Veninga Theater. I'm sure you're familiar with those. I recently retired from the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service, WIPS, and our home is in the UW Center for Civic Engagement, the name of the entire building. And that space has been WIP's home for 15 years. In that theater, not only has it hosted WIP's events, it has hosted events from A Walk in Their Shoes, the Chamber of Commerce, the Central Wisconsin Book Festival. Tim mentioned one just recently that I thought of and I forgot it, but it is used for special events, for guest speakers. There are debates with candidates, local, state, and federal, that are hosted at that venue. So there is certainly a lot of value there in the performing arts, but there is also a lot of value in the community outreach and in the form of guest speakers, educational events, and whatnot. I have a sister-in-law who lives in Stillwater, Minnesota, and she pays compliments to Wausau that sound like this. Oh, the Radisson Inn there, that's so nice for Wausau. Or the Central Wisconsin Educational Theater Alliance, the big, we call it the Theater All-Stars. She'll come to a show and say, I never expected something like this in Wausau. Now, if she saw the Veninga Theater, she wouldn't appreciate all the wonderful aspects of it. But if she knew about all the things that happen there, she would probably say, wow, that's pretty amazing for Wausau. And I would say it would be pretty amazing for Stillwater, Minnesota, or even the Twin Cities. So thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else? That concludes the public hearing. Now we'll move on to educational presentations and committee discussion. Nothing will be acted on today. This is the first step in a number of step process. So Administrator Leonard.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Robinson and Chair Marash. So in your packet, as Chair Robinson referenced, we tried to put together some materials that I hope give you an overview of the campus, and I'm going to kick it very quickly to Chris to talk through the facilities and walk you through some of the materials. He put together some summary information, and then I know some of the other information materials are probably appear familiar to you because they were the same materials that the UW Stevens Point Wausau campus staff shared previously when they did their space analysis. But the first part of the discussion today is my 3 minutes are up. The first part of the discussion is to give you just help everyone get grounded in what the facility is and kind of the state of it. Then we'll transition a bit to talk about, much like you heard from the members of public comment, what some of the recent discussions or expressions of interest and current use of the facility are. And then really while no decision is going to be made today, it's not agendized for action, but as it relates to the campus, the idea of starting to chart a course in terms of how is it that the board is going to make a decision about future use of the facility. You have some time, but not a great deal of time. As you know, the UW Stevens Point facility is going to essentially be occupied through about the middle of 26, but then the UW has committed to ongoing financial support relative to holding costs through the end of 26. So that doesn't mean, of course, your decision can't go beyond that, but there are consequences to that, right? So we want to just start the conversation today, and I'll try to scroll through the materials, or else, Chris, if you want to come up here, you can do that too, however you want to do it. But Chris can talk you through just an overview of the facilities. Please feel free to ask questions at any point, and want this to be as interactive as we can make it, as we, again, talk through what does the facility look like currently, and then start to talk about expressions of interest and what a decision-making process might look like.
No, it's okay.
Okay, thank you. So when we originally started talking about the campus, the sort of the history from the county's point of view was a point of where we had focused a lot on the capital infrastructure for those larger projects that this committee and the board is generally familiar with over the years. And, roofs, major HVAC work, a central heating plant, things like that. So we were more familiar with that. We have since we've got the news, and I want to make sure I just note that the summary and the information today and moving forward is sort of a compilation of things that we understand, but also from the facilities crew there at UWMC SP-Wausau. So that's Gary Reduns. He worked there for decades, really ran the show. Bill Gibbs has stepped into his role, and their facilities team is managing things currently. And then Chris Berg as well as sort of updated and modernized a lot of the building information into a really accessible format. So that, sorry. So, yeah. Are you sending a message? No. So that information is all very helpful in terms of getting a more holistic look at the campus as a whole. So when I put together the summary, it was hard to tell like how far to get into the weeds on certain things, but certainly we can dig into different areas based on your curiosities and questions moving forward. I think the main thing I wanted to show was sort of how is the campus laid out? What are the buildings involved? How are they dependent on something or tied together or not? So in general, when you add up the size of the parcels that make up the campus, you're looking at 10.5 acres. And so that's not including the sidewalks and roads and everything else. So it's slightly larger than that. There's a slight leaking of the campus into Marathon Park in the southwest corner, where the older arts building is located. And then from the building's perspective, we have all the individual building square footages, but as a whole, the buildings total up to 200 and, just shy of 240,000 square feet. So it's a fair number of square feet to deal with. We're familiar with it as a campus. Obviously, we've had people reach out about prospective uses, but I think part of the frame of thinking, at least in those discussions, is you're dealing with classrooms, auditoriums, gathering spaces, the library, things like that. So as we work through sort of the thoughts and, questions that people have and potential uses moving forward, a lot of that's going to shape, how that would be a good fitter or not, and also like any cost you might incur if you needed to sort of manipulate the space to better fit what people wanted to do there. That said, a campus is pretty flexible in the sense of there's not a lot of hyper-specific uses. There are some, but you can work with that depending on where things go. I did provide a real quick pie chart, and there's numerous of these depending on the data you look at, just to give you a sense of how the space is allocated across the campus. And doing an aerial overview of the campus, I outlined the parcels in red that are essentially tied to the central heating plant, which is located down here across the railroad tracks. So as you move north, you've got the old art building here, splitting the parcel line. You've got the newer art building, then the field house across the street from Marathon Hall, the old dorm. And then you have South Hall moving up through the campus main building and North Hall. Then, of course, across the street, we have the theater, the parking lot, and the green space. And then, of course, in this small area, you might wonder why it looks different. That's the retention pond for that location. So the reason this parcel is in green is that the theater and that building and its infrastructure are standalone. So the building operates on its own. It's got its own HVAC, it's got its own systems that make that place work. That's a good thing for that in terms of thinking about how you can contemplate uses of the space. And then conversely, you have the red parcels who are all tied into the central heating plant. So as it stands, the status quo is, during the winter, the heating plant and associated HVAC equipment, keep that space, keep the air moving, keep it warm, et cetera. It doesn't mean that you would have to necessarily keep it that way. It would just mean, as I kind of alluded to earlier, that if there was a separate use for any one of the buildings within that location, part of that discussion could be how do you turn that building into something that's standalone if it's not going to be a part of the entire picture that's tied into that central heating plant. I did circle this down here just to make you aware that the older arts building here, there hasn't been water in it for a couple of years because when we had to update the Marathon Park Waters project a couple of years ago, we found, it was a surprise to us, fun digging around, that the water for this building actually came from Marathon Park. And so when we moved forward, it didn't make sense to keep that connected. But then we started thinking about how can we get water back to that facility. And that I kind of referenced some of the saga of that later in the document. But the building itself is very old, very dated. There's lead pipes, there's likely asbestos. It's one of those onions that you might not want to take the peels off of. There's no current use in there. There hasn't been for a long time. It used to be ceramics. There were some kilns in there. Those have been filled. There's been vandalism in the greenhouse side of things. So as the campus goes, this building has seen better days. So effectively, even though I show the parcel line splitting and kind of talk about, the water issue and things like that later in the document, I don't know that proposes a significant challenge for anybody because you wouldn't necessarily want to use that building moving forward. So if there was a future where the building wasn't there, then all of those sort of questions go away. The let's see, moving down. Is there anything else here? No. So the recent county focus, I won't repeat myself, but we've been spending the last, I'd say, 2 years really getting into the HVAC side of things. So our HVAC staff at facilities, we know and have resolved a lot of the issues that we found there. There was one minor one in the theater, it was really just augmenting a boiler system there. But most of our knowledge and updates and renovation has been focused on the HVAC side of things. As I kind of speak to each building, this is really a hop, skip, and a jump. But as people have said in their comments here today, that overall the Civic Center building is in good condition. There's things like the elevators that will need modernizing at some point. There's some flooring issues here. There's a door that doesn't quite shut the way you want. But these are all things that are pretty negligible in the grand scheme. So whether it's turnkey or however you might describe the building, compared to the rest of the buildings on campus, it's more modern, there's fewer needs, it's easier to kind of think about on its own, and like I said, it's standalone as well. So it's really not been an issue for us in terms of having major problems to address. Marathon Hall, we've discussed the dorm for multiple times over the last couple of years. It hasn't really been used as a dorm for several years, so it's just been sitting there. There's been some interest, but effectively by lack of use and just aged systems, aged equipment, and just a really old design, though robust design, I should say, in terms of construction. The building would have a lot of things to do to it to get it up to different uses. It would really hinge on what you wanted to do there, but the guts of the building would have a lot of things that need to be addressed. That doesn't mean you can't address them, of course. It's just to say that it's when it's like even if you just had a shed on your property and you've had stuff in there for 5 or 6 years and never been in there, things change in the building even though nothing's really happened. So similar here. There hasn't been as much maintenance, also because of the questions around its use. There's been discussions between the county and university about should it be used as a dorm? There's a dorm fund that's related to the facility. We've had some conversations about how that dorm fund is now and what the disposition of those funds should be moving forward, given the situation that we're discussing. So there have been funds there to fix things, if you will, but absent any use, we haven't been doing anything there. Even to the point of, there was a lawnmower one day that smashed a window and we just boarded it up rather than pay the $2,000 to $3,000 to fix the window. So it didn't make sense to do a lot there with question marks still hovering all over the place. The main campus building, it is a mix of newer and older construction. There are some areas, there's a couple of chronic leaks here or there where some additions were put on. But it is generally in decent condition. There are areas that are very aged or original. The bathrooms in some cases are 1960s vintage. So that's why you see them on the 5-year capital list from the county. But they are functional. They do have some unique issues there, but a lot of the major issues for those buildings have been taken care of because it's been primarily continued to be used over the years. You've got the staff there, you've got some classes there, the teaching, things like that. So the main things you needed to have occupancy and make sure that the building functioned for those uses have been addressed. There are things like on the exterior and in other areas that depending on how you would use it, you would want to address. But again, if you weren't going to have a use of it, was it a higher priority? No, we'll focus on the big things. So we've done a good job of maintaining the big things. I won't go into the details that are all in the document there, and there's more. We did, as a facility staff, meet with the UW staff a couple of weeks ago, again, to get more of that day-to-day perspective that they have that we lack or have lacked as we've kind of taken the last couple of years to get to know the campus better and get the county having a more active role in some of the discussions in terms of day-to-day issues and what to do. The field house, the pool is there. The pool is still programmed. The pool is also very old. There have been issues with it over the years. When it was drained, it actually heaved and caused some problems because the weight was removed. There's been tiling issues, things like this, but it is functional and people are swimming in it and using it. Some people like it more than warmer water pools, like the therapy pool at North Central. Not that that's a public pool, but the point being that there's a difference in water temp for what people want to do. And so that pool has remained popular for those who are using it for the programs that are there. There's some racquetball courts and things like that you would expect. There's a small gym upstairs. The main part of the field house, obviously, besides from the pool, is the gymnasium. The gymnasium has some issues around the perimeter of that space, but the floor is in really good condition for its age. It is kind of in that realm of maybe getting one or two more standings before you're not going to be able to address floor issues any longer. So that being said, when it was originally done, it was done the right way, and it's probably still one of the better floors in any two-year campus in the state. So for function and use, it's served that purpose well, too. Trying to think of what else is in there. There's some related office spaces, locker rooms, things like that, things you would expect in a sort of a sporty facility. But the UW staff over there have done a good job as well to maintain the key portions of what you need to make the space work for them, especially given, you know, we have a budget line for the maintenance that they perform on behalf of the campus as just shy of $60,000 a year. That really, you know, as time has gone on, hasn't covered all of the needs. So there's been some overrun on that, but I work with Bill now over there to say, okay, we do need to do this, so we'll cover the balance, things like that, just because it makes sense of things that you really have to do. The art buildings, I've talked about the older art building. Again, it hasn't been used in some time other than for storage, and it had been some ceramic use. But the newer building is nicer. The north-facing windows have some leaking issues occasionally, but really you've got a lot of space in that building that's more modern and up to date in terms of just the build, the quality of what's in there to use. And they're really, if you think about it, you know, they're open spaces that you can interpret any number of ways for art. So if you've had this art program, that art program, print presses, anything like this, it's been in that space for the time that the classes were offered and served that purpose well. So it's an open format kind of space as compared to the campus building, which is broken down into much more constituent parts. Yeah, I already talked about the water issue. There was a recent WPS redid some gas lines just north of there along the road, because as we were talking about some potential programming in the new art building, it was like, how can we bring gas into that space? And so that's actually, if there was a potential need for that to happen, that's easier now than it was previously based on the new line that's in there. So that would be not as much of a challenge. Before then, you would have had to come all the way down Garfield, and it would have been much more expensive to bring gas into the building. Again, I referenced in the document that some parts of the campus parcels are in TID number 8. How this plays into the conversation, I don't know, but the reason I reference it is because of that water issue in the old art building. Because I was looking for the way to make it simple. You know, how can I get around this situation? Because at the time, and I won't go into too much of this, but there's really only one tiny space between the new art building and the railroad that you can get utilities through, and everyone is already there. So getting a vendor to shoot a new line and not hit any of that, we couldn't get anybody who was willing to do it. So we started looking at what's an easier way to bring the water in. So we said, well, can't we just bring it from the new art building? But you can't because it's of the parcel and municipal codes. And so then we said, well, let's combine the parcel, but we couldn't combine the parcel because it's in the TID and the TID can't adjust its borders. There's all kinds of layering of impacts in terms of code and state law that effectively made it virtually impossible to do this simpler approach to get water there. So I said, to heck with it. You know, at some point in the future, the TID boundaries will be able to change because that's not a static thing. But in any case, for all intents and purposes, water is not going to that building. And then you see that the TID number 8 does stretch into this. It goes across into Marathon Park as well and further down the road on Stewart there. And then also this particular parcel here, the northern portion of the parcel is in a TID. The southern parcel with the field house and new art building is not. The central heating plant is in good condition. We spent several $100,000 over the last 3 years, or 2.5 years, I should say. getting that up to snuff, modernizing it, moving away from an older fuel oil burning situation. So as far as a future use, even if it was to continue to feed those buildings, that particular plant is in a good condition to do so for the near term. There's going to be things that pop up. There's a few things left to switch from pneumatics to a more automated system, but we've done a lot of work in that space to modernize it. I did note that there were CIP requests for the campus that were deferred along with every other, or most other CIP requests, but I thought it important for you to know that there are some HVAC controls and unit vents in the main campus building that could have been under consideration. The building envelope for the main campus building, there's areas of the ephes and other parts that are deteriorating, and that's just something where the water gets in and continues to erode and cause some problems. So long story short there, for the campus and just buildings in general, next year is going to be the year of how do we address issues like that inexpensively in a way we know isn't best practices, but keeps it from deteriorating because of the lack of funds. And then the restroom updates, this is one that's been on there for years, and we've always punted in favor of higher priority items, but that's referring back to those 1960s era's bathrooms. And then I also just included the 5-year list to give you a sense from the county's perspective, along with UW staff, what, looking ahead, did they see as the main issues that they would want us to address from that capital infrastructure perspective. And with that, maybe I dove a little too far, didn't hop or skip, but that's as quick as an overview as I can give. Certainly in moving forward in conversations, if there's more detail you want in a particular area, we have HVAC and maintenance staff, and UW has staff that we can make available to speak to those issues more precisely. But in general, I think that's a good sort of sense of what we're talking about.
Are there any questions for Chris at this time?
Well, and we won't go through the rest of the pictures in the document, but those are the slides from the previous presentation from UWSP staff. You'll see the pictures of the art studios and a lot of the buildings and the layouts that Chris referenced, again, at that high level. So that is I think that was a good hop, skip, and a jump through nearly 250,000 square feet of buildings. As Chris said, I think one of the big takeaways there's a lot of that campus that is in really pretty sound shape, despite the fact that some of the buildings are dated. There are some areas that are a bit challenged, and then of course you have the newest building, which is the theater building. So with that, I handed out a document and I emailed it to committee members. I want to start with a guarantee that the document itself is guaranteed to be wrong. This was my attempt to frame at a very, very high level, in a very simplistic way, what I think are some of the choices, or the primary choice, I should say, that I think we're ultimately going to be looking for action in the near future. And that is, in the document, I give you the background, which Chris did a nice job on the buildings. Remember, the UW is going to be present and operating out of those buildings, generally speaking, through the middle of next year. They're committing to facility upkeep costs through the end of 26. So during that transition time, I started with the background. It's really, how does the county identify what the highest and best uses are? Are there critical county needs? Are there community needs you're caring about? How do you minimize potential risk? And what I'll talk about at, again, a high level later in the document that I reference, you do have the potential to leverage some time-limited, how time-limited I don't know, but time-limited state redevelopment support. So there's a fair amount of things that I think you're going to want to consider. I want to open with kind of the comments, again, that were made during public comment. There have been, not only today, but over the last several months, certainly a fair number of individuals and entities that have reached out to county staff, and I know to many of you, on the county board to express interest or opinions with respect to ongoing use of those buildings. As Julie referenced, there's a lot of facilities and entities that continue to occupy that space, have done so for a long time. So I just tried to summarize what some of those were. You heard from Mr. Kalish today about workforce development. We did have an email exchange relative to the idea of a job center, the community theater and arts groups, as you've heard from a number of people today, and the full board received an email from a very passionate local individual, my neighbor, Rick, who spoke today. You have the OB Library, the OB Institute in the bottom of the lower floor of the Center for Civic Engagement. You've heard from the ECDC group. Each of these committees, you previously heard about a proposal that they would be willing to take ownership of that building. Wisconsin Public Radio, if you didn't know, they operate also out of the Center for Civic Engagement. They had a conversation with Chris and I about a desire to remain there, as did I believe the UW Stevens Point Continuing Education has that interest. I referenced WIPS. The Wausau School District has reached out and had conversations previously with the UW about one of the arts buildings being utilized. So suffice to say, there's a fair number of entities that have historically relied upon spaces throughout the campus. And I didn't even talk about some of the other nonprofits that currently operate in conjunction with the UW that are in the main campus building. I focused a lot on the Center for Civic Engagement. So there is that community historic use. Those entities have come to rely upon those facilities in some form and fashion. So I wanted to included that in the document. The next part is that state grant opportunity. If you're not familiar, the state of Wisconsin, in light of some of the concerns and previous closures of what I'll call branch campuses over the last several years, the state set aside money for redevelopment in the event of closure. How much money is $2 million per branch campus? A number of campuses have put forward some proposals to WEDC to access those funds. I don't have a lot of detail. Chris had a conversation with a representative from Sauk County they're going through a similar exercise. But the long and short of it is that $2 million is set aside for redevelopment. There are some limits or restrictions on how those funds can be accessed and what that redevelopment has to look like. From my perspective, one of the big ones out of the gate that I need to learn more about is it has to be for a non-academic use. Now, as you saw in the presentation that Chris walked you through and those nice aerial photos, you have a lot of buildings. So we have some work to do on the staff side about what do those restrictions mean? How do they apply? Is there a way that we can essentially take the campus and, as you parse off various pieces, can some be for academic use and then, of course, would not be eligible for those funds, and others perhaps could be eligible for those grant dollars. There's a lot to learn there, and we're continuing to have those conversations, but I thought it was important to note that in the document that is something that's available. How long? I referenced before, I don't know. We'll do some work. My understanding right now, and it's very limited, is that there's no expressed cutoff date that you need to access the funds by a certain date. That said, it has also been my experience that units of government, federal, state, and local, have money set aside until they find something else that they need the money for to do. So is that a possibility? I don't know. But thought that was important. So that brings me to my the second page of the document that I put together. And again, this is highly simplistic, but as I see it right now, one of the first decisions staff needs some direction on is what does it look like? How is it that you're going to assess what are the potential uses of that campus or potential interest? And I think you can, again, at a highly simplistic level, you do that either internally or externally. The internal side, the way that You know, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, for me, whenever we are looking to figure out what we're going to do with something, we do a request for proposals. We want to see what people are interested in. That's the hammer hitting the nail. I think we can do that. That's that internal, put together a request for proposals, see what the interest is locally. I would assume, you know, if you're asking me what my thought is right now, if we went that route, we would craft that in a way, and we'll talk about a template that in your next item on your agenda that we put together for a different facility the county owns. But we draft that request for proposals in a way that solicits as much opportunity for entities to respond. That is, if you're only interested in the Center for Civic Engagement, you can respond and say that. Conversely, on the far other end of the spectrum, if you're interested in the entire campus and have a holistic plan, we want to make sure we offer that opportunity for proposers to respond as well. So that's the internal approach. And I put right in there, you know, I think if we were to go that route, my brain starts working on how would I make that happen. I'd certainly sit down with the city of Wausau and their economic development folks and talk about some of the things that they've learned. I think we have a strong template for requests for proposals, largely pulled from other local governments. But that's the internal side. Option two, or the other, again, highly simplistic course of action you could take is you seek external redevelopment assistance. That's what Sauk County's doing. They put out a request for proposals for external professional economic development experience to put together a plan for the whole campus. They did so in a way that was able to leverage that WEDC grant. My sense, however, one of the downsides of that, and we have to learn more, if you're going to use the grant, the WEDC dollars to come up with the plan, I need to confirm this, so don't hold me to it, but my sense is you have to limit the use. You have to say that any proposer needs to respond in a way that fits within the restrictions of the WEDC grant. Why is that important? Again, as I understand it right now, that WEDC program requires redevelopment for a non-academic use. So it does restrict who might respond. I think if you were to go, again, that's the external side. If you went the internal side, you can certainly write it in a way, and I reference this in the document, you could write it in a way that says the county may apply for the WEDC redevelopment funds if the proposer's response is consistent with the grant requirements. So again, that's a high level. Do we do it internally, or do you seek external assistance? Regardless of course of action, I tried to at least put a couple of bullet points down as to what I think from your previous conversations at each of your committees and some conversations about other facilities that the county owns, that, hey, what would be the objectives for, that you might want to achieve in that RFP, either internally or externally, about looking for what are really truly feasible and financeable concepts. The idea that you'd want proposers to respond with what their disposition structure looks like, preferred disposition structure, and what I mean by that is, are they gonna buy it, or are they looking to lease something from the county? Selfishly, other duties as assigned, I understand that's a big part of my job. I greatly prefer not to have landlord be the other duties as assigned. It's a hard job. But I fully appreciate the county. I would assume you want to at least hear from both sides, or if someone is interested in that. So that's why I left that in there. You want to create an RFP either way that looks at, that allows proposers to look at the campus as a holistic, single organism, as Chris referenced before, or you want them to have the opportunity to respond to limited pieces, and then lastly, again, the WEDC funding for redevelopment, have that incorporated. So in terms of again, I know this is going to be wrong, but getting some direction from the board ultimately, I think sooner rather than later on at least whether we go out, if the decision is to go out and get some external assistance through that is paid for by the WEDC grant, let us know that sooner rather than later because we can start that process. I would hope maybe by December, the end of December, the board has started to consider that. And I know one of the other pieces, I just threw that in as a decision point, it's the last line, but you heard it in public comment today. There's a number of organizations that currently rely upon those facilities, and I know the UW is looking to transition out of the operations of those facilities in the middle of the year. They're going to be moving out. Answering the question of, is the county going to say that because the UW is transitioning out, that those entities, their ability to rely upon that space also ends, or are you at least going to commit to something through the end of the year, I think is another, that's a question that's been asked of staff. And of course, we're not in a position to answer that question. That's a county board question, so I put it on there. So that was a lot relatively quickly. Again, this is by no means a proposal from me as to what you should do. It was my attempt to put down on paper a couple of thoughts that you may want to, that may be helpful as you start to have those conversations. But with that, Mr. Chair, I think Chris and I are probably done, and now we'll listen unless you have questions.
So if I could just interject, my understanding is that there is a work group put together between UW Stevens Point and NTC working on transitional issues as they deal with it. And I know that there are a number of issues that have come to my attention. Where does the art go? Where do other things go? So do we have we formalized the structure between UWSP and the county relative to identifying those issues? So post-May, post-end of the semester, use next year, and where would we direct? Is that all directed toward Chris sort of on an interim basis? So those people that are looking to plan for the fall and 2000, it will be difficult for us to project what happens in 2027 until we go through the RFP process. But what is our mechanism now?
Yeah, well, great question. I would answer, it depends.
Or perhaps?
Yeah, again, we will find a way, staff will find a way to, if the direction from the board is to find a way for those organizations that are non-UWSP to remain in the facility or continue to utilize the facility post August 1, we'll have to identify who the point of contact is and what that looks like.
So do we have, toward that end, do we have an understanding of what happens at the end of the semester? What does UWSP's obligation go for the balance of?
Miranda's in the back, and she can answer what they're planning. Your question about what does that work group look like with NTC, she can certainly take that. I will just say, before Miranda takes it, Chris and I recently had a conversation with Gretel, Dr. Stock, who's on the appearing virtually for the meeting, talking about what does that process look like for, it's going to be a long exit. The UW is a big animal. It's got a lot of stuff in that campus, and articulating and figuring out what they know they're taking, what perhaps they're not interested in taking, what might serve the county, and by the county I mean the county board, in terms of what you want the future of those spaces to be. Maybe there's things in light of the direction you give that make sense to stay. So we've started to have those conversations, but I'll let Miranda talk through where they're at with NTC if you can.
Yeah, certainly. So we are in close conversation with NTC about really all aspects of this transition. What we're focusing on more internally is what we're doing with everything we have in our current buildings. So what this looks like is that we don't want any disruptions for students this whole year. So nothing big is really moving out of the building until classes end in mid-May. Once we get to that point, we'll start going through more of that process of starting to move things out of the building section by section. In terms of what will happen with all of the things in the building, we're developing those plans now, and certainly we do have openness to seeing if there are things that the county has use for, right, for the spaces once we leave. And we're going to be looking at a number of different options for how things transition out of the space. Certainly, I know that conversations need to start happening about what will happen with the spaces once we exit. I do think it's going to take quite a while for us to move everything out of the buildings, which is why we have the timeline set the way we do. But that doesn't mean that we won't entertain conversations about uses for some of the spaces on campus prior to the end of 2026 when we're fully out of the buildings.
So I have a question. When we discussed with our work group last year, we determined that you're only using about 20% of the space. So would you entertain entities coming in before you completely vacate to use some of those spaces ahead of time?
That is a discussion we'd be happy to have. I think one of the things that we'll have to keep in mind for any of the spaces that we're not currently using is we're still kind of using some spaces around them. And so anybody who's coming in would need to be aware that once we get into the summer, noise levels might be a little louder with like moving things out of different parts of the building. But definitely, those are conversations that we're happy to have because we have had a lot of conversations with different entities in the community about use of spaces on campus. For anyone who is currently leasing space with us, those contracts do all end mostly at the end of our fiscal year, at the end of June. And so if anybody's told me that they're interested in coming into or using space on campus at this point, I've said it needs to be a discussion with the county since we're not entering into any new agreements. But we could certainly have conversations about us moving things out of an area of the building earlier if we're in agreement on an entity moving in as we're moving out.
And then I was curious too, on just a different note, with the continuing education, when it was presented what the plan was for consolidating with NTC, maybe I misunderstood, but I thought it was explained that you were going to consolidate with NTC for continuing ed so that it would avoid duplication.
So there are some areas of our continuing education that is similar to what NTC does. And so I think certainly like we won't have duplications happening. And not necessarily like a lot of our continuing education coming over to NTC with us. Certainly not for office space. I'm not sure yet about what any continuing education events might look like over at NTC. There will still be UWSP presence in Wausau for continuing education. But yes, certainly we're not going to have duplications of services.
Thank you. I have a question for Lance. Do we know, based on discussions with Sauk County, what the cost is to have external redevelopment assistance?
Yeah, when Sauk County, their approach, and I should thank them publicly, it was a very helpful conversation in demystifying some of the process. But nevertheless, one of the questions I had for them was, with the $2 million state grant, a lot of the communication on it has been you submit a plan to get the funds. So I was curious about how did you fund this professional services as a part of the whole? So the explanation was that their application through WEDC was vetted out through multiple channels, and ultimately it was easier and more straightforward to get the $2 million as a package And I think it was $150,000 of that they had allocated for the RFP, up to that amount. It wasn't a set amount. And so people responded to that. And then I think the thing, I can't speak for the legislature, WEDC, or anybody else, but understanding what I know of it, I think their approach is what also facilitated them getting the $2 million as part of their overall effort up front, and having that 150 pop out of it, is that their RFP stipulated that whatever the outcomes were for the redevelopment had to be meeting the parameters of the WEDC grant. So there wouldn't be any sort of pop-up question at the end that, well, that's not a use that you can actually use this money for. So if I'm in the legislature or wherever, I'm seeing their effort as being in line. And so there's a bit of an assurance in that their intention is to have that 150 contribute to the spirit of what the funding was provided for overall.
So as a follow-up to that question, I think it would be critical for us to have an understanding of what those eligible costs would be as we prep it. And I think that would be something that we would need either this month or early December in order to make the decision on whether we go internal or external and how we might use those dollars. So is there somebody from WEDC that could make a presentation or meet with us relative to the potential use of those dollars, or could we rely on staff to go in and get that summary and summarize what those eligible activities are, so we've got a better understanding?
I would say yes. I mean, I'm comfortable based on that conversation to say that, we've met with our WEDC regional representative. I think Sauk County had worked with another individual as well who could be able to shed some light on it. But I should also say that I don't know they have a prescriptive list. I think their idea was, can we do this? So then it went to Leg Council, it went to the legislature committee and through WEDC to get the approval saying, okay, yeah, this is something you can do. They didn't necessarily say that professional services is a subset of eligible uses. It was the question that I had that they then asked to see if it was eligible. So that being said, if in addition to professional services, there was a general inquiry that, based on Sauk County's experience, we could certainly frame it that way. Are there other things that the same sort of network of approvals would see as prospective eligible uses under the funds for redevelopment? But I don't know that there's a specific list that they had that they referenced.
So there have been, my understanding is 4 2-year campuses that have been shut down to date. Have we reached out to them for lessons learned as to what the best approach would be, and what guidance would they do, and what failures did they learn from?
Yeah, we have spoken, that's primarily the reason I reached out to Sauk County, and our esteemed colleague here, Brian, was also able to provide some insight. But their experience being concurrent to ours was of interest, in addition to the question of the funding. I think, there's been a few applications to the fund. A couple of them have not been approved. The ones, the most straightforward application of the grant was Fond du Lac County, that basically turned the campus into county facilities. So that was much more straightforward. Sauk County is more complicated because this county and the city co-own the portions of the campus, and their positions are not the same in terms of funding, redevelopment opportunity, et cetera. So there might be more wrinkles in some of those situations that wouldn't directly apply to us. But yeah, Waukesha County, I believe, had a successful application. So I think theirs was for housing, but I could reach out to them as well to figure out how did it work for them. I think we do have a general idea of what didn't work. And I think those were tied back to what Administrator Leonard said in terms of non-academic purposes being sort of a gray area question that people had. Does that mean UW specific? Does that mean charter school? Does that mean school district? And I think based on my conversations, it's more of a broad interpretation of academic, regardless of UW or not.
Yeah, if I can add, I think that, as we understand it right now, is the biggest limitation on use. And there was some question because the grant program, the legislature made the allocation, and then the governor did some partial vetoes, and there's some question as to whether those were, the partial vetoes remain in effect or not. But ultimately, the big limitation is as I understand it right now, as we understand it right now, that the funds cannot be used for redeveloping facilities that are or will be used for academic purposes. So what they can be used for, the funds are to contribute to the overall economic improvement and enhancement of the community. So things like Chris referenced, job creation, workforce development, small business support, housing, public infrastructure. In terms of eligible activities, the planning, which is what Sauk County is utilizing a portion of those funds for, is an eligible expense. One of the nice things that from Chris's conversation with Sauk County that he relayed to me, I found helpful, is that it alleviated a bit of my concern that depending on how you structure it, my thought was, well, you either apply for the planning money and you only get one kick at the can of, hey, I'm applying for $150,000 to help plan, or do you do the planning yourself and wait for the plan to be generated and then try to access the full $2 million pot of funds? There is at least a strategy to have the best of both worlds. That's that external approach that I referenced. That said, the concern I have is what Chris referenced before, that if you then to utilize the WEDC funds, do you need to restrict any use of the campus that might otherwise fall under that non-academic use? And you might have a great entity that wants essentially no contribution from the county. Maybe this isn't likely, but it's a potential. Entity X says, I want to operate, I'll pick Chris's example, a charter school. I'll take the whole thing. I'll take all the responsibility, all the risk, and I don't need any money from the county. Because one of the other pieces for the WEDC grant monies, as I understand it, is you do need some local funding match. The question was, that was partially vetoed, so I got to look into whether or not that still applies. But at least as it was written, there was a 20% match. So all those things to be said, I'm confident that staff can pull together from conversations with peer counties and just from the WEDC materials, what are the kind of constraints or general parameters of those programs, and bring those back to you. And we can do that relatively quickly, I think.
The only thing I'll add is that another sort of question that we can ask, and this would be more directed to WEDC, is when you're looking at the campus as a whole, maybe that's a challenge, even if you cast a wide net to find somebody who's going to try to use the whole thing. Can you look at it in its constituent parts, right? Could you carve this out and have a academic use, and then have funds still apply to a different portion of the campus for a non-academic use? So there's questions like that we don't have an answer to yet, but it's something we can find out as part of that conversation.
And I would say that's one of the reasons that that concern about the WEDC fund limitation, maybe that will be alleviated, but on the internal side, you put out the RFP, and if 4 of the 5 you get really good proposals that you like, and each one takes individual pieces, and some are academic, well, those can't be eligible for the WEDC funds, and the rest could. So a lot of decisions, but at the same time, there's a lot of possibilities, I think, as we understand it right now. But we can bring that to your next meeting.
Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Part of my question was answered with that, to wonder if we could use some of those funds as sort of a piecemeal. And second of all, thank you to all the public who's here. I am absolutely, my heart is warmed, because one of my focuses is to retain the social and cultural and economic draw that building, the whole campus, has to our community. And I was super excited to hear Mr. Parker and Mr. Kalish have plans. And I guess I'm wondering, how do we move forward with something similar to that? Is there enough space for both? That would need a lot of cooperation with the UWSP? I mean, how do we move forward with what the public wants, not to shove anybody out the door too soon? You know, how do we do an off-ramp and then an on-ramp?
Great question. My sense is, and I'm certainly open to being directed elsewhere, but you got to decide the threshold. How do you want to gauge community interest? And still in my mind right now, even if we get the additional information, which I'm sure it's going to be helpful, so please don't take it that way. But it's, do we do the internal side or do we do the external side? And then I hope all the people in the back of the room get together and they meet and have the conversation you just referenced and put together a proposal on how they envision using that building and how they envision that disposition or that transfer happening. But that's my initial sense. I don't know, Chris, if you had a different thought.
Yeah, I'll just add by saying, some of the people who have reached out, I've met with them and kind of showed them the space. There's no sort of, it's just really a tour, like this is what it is. So the reason you do that, like in a traditional building project, you would do a space programming and figure out what are your actual space needs. But what we have is an already designed space. So then we would have to figure out, how do you reinterpret the space for any particular use or combination of uses? And so, if there's 134,000 square feet in the main campus building and DWD needs 6,500 of it, then you still have the balance. And then for Mr. Parker's, like how many square feet is he envisioning? And then what's the gap? And then again, what's the nature, as Lance alluded to earlier, in terms of, is it county owning? Is it some sort of triple net lease structure? Is it a different kind of lease? Because you've got the operational costs in that, which then would have to reflect back on the potential users individually and as a whole. And you see things like that, like business, like bids and business districts where they kind of combine funds to use a space. But really, there's a practical side of it to figure out how do you fit, can you fit, and then where you don't fit, what is it going to cost to allow that space to be used for what you're wanting to use it for?
And the only thing I'll clarify is I would much prefer that the county not be, like, we're not the people saying, hey, I'll give you these rooms, and let them have the conversation. We'll walk you through, to Chris's point, in an RFP. Come see the building. We're going to give everybody a tour on a date. Walk through, look at it, ask questions, and then meet, sit down, figure out who you want to roommate with, and what spaces you want to share and what spaces you want to have to your own, and put together a proposal. And then from that, ultimately the decision is going to be the county board. Staff are not, quite honestly, I'm not trying to pass the buck, but it's not a staff role. The county board is, you by statute, if you want to sell a building, sell some property, that's a county board decision. Staff aren't going to lease buildings or space to an entity and without direction from the board. So my hope, regardless of what option you kind of, in terms of how we go in terms of what I, again, simplistic view, path one or path two, internal, external, at the end of the day, all those paths lead back to the county board to say, what do you want to do? And evaluate those responses.
I would just caution the board is we want to look at any and all proposals for that campus. And, there may be something out there. I know that there have been conversations relative to bringing in another university into that space. I think what we want to do is go through a process that is deliberative and inclusive as possible. And it may be possible under some unknown scenario that all of the needs of the community represented by the people here and others could be met. So I would hope that we would be as open, inclusive as possible. I think the critical issue is by what criteria will we evaluate the proposals once they come in? And I think that is where we really need the community's input into that evaluation process. And I would hope that there would be some unknown entities that would come forward with proposals for us to think through. And, one of the things we looked at the field house is potential community recreational center and other things in talking about things. So there are multiple opportunities out there that are represented in this room and are not yet voiced.
Go ahead.
So as a follow-up to that, sorry, I'm just curious then, how do we let the public know, if there's an entity that's in there and they are wishing to stay, or for instance, the PA program, what's the status of some of those higher ed degrees? Are they staying? Are they not? I mean, there's all these unknowns. It'd be nice to have some sort of, I don't know, online dashboard and then a rapid digital survey given so people can have a repository to inquire, and a map showing, these are taken, these aren't, these are taken to this date. I don't know, I just feel like if I were somebody who had money and wanted to invest in this, I'd really need to know what's possible and what's taken.
Sure. Short answer, I think the way you do that is through the RFP itself. You're going to spell out what the facility is. You'll offer a facility tour. And the other short answer is all of those entities that are currently in there, if the board wants them all out, you can have them all out. But that's your decision. At the same time, if you want, and I'll let Miranda answer what is happening with the PA program. And but again, at the end of the day, the facility can be as blank a slate as the board wants to solicit. To Chair Robinson's point, you can entertain any proposal you want. The fact that, sorry, Julie, the fact that WIPS is there and would love nothing more to stay, they don't get a vote on the county board as to what happens with that, with whether you want to give them a lease option. You all were elected to make that decision. Staff don't get a vote either. But we can absolutely, I think, to your point, the way you get the best responses you could is you have a RFP that spells out what the facility is, what the current uses are, and any entities that have expressed interest, provide an avenue through which that information can be obtained. And then hopefully, in a perfect world, those organic conversations happen and people find synergy where it exists. I don't live in a Pollyannic world. I don't think everyone's gonna be happy with what comes out, but the hope is that the board gets the best proposals it can get, and the board makes the best decision it can make. I don't know, Miranda, if you wanna provide the update on what's happening with the PA program.
Yeah, so certainly. So we have told everyone who's sharing space in our buildings that their contracts with us end. And I know that the PA program is definitely interested in staying in Wausau. They've had conversations with NTC, and I'm not sure if they've gotten confirmation that they can move over there. If not, then I think there are other sites that they'll look at as well. I have heard that they want to keep this option, certainly because it is a really great thing for our community. And I think certainly when I find out where they'll be transitioning to, I can share that.
And I just don't mean to sound callous, and I'm sure I did. I think there's also the opportunity to create the forum for the discussions, right? Like there's nothing that would stop the county from having a open house with like, hey, here are all the entities, WIPS, WPR, continuing ed, all the people that currently use it, and just have everybody get in a room. If only we had a bunch of space that we could have people meet in, and have that conversation, and then allow them to have further conversations. I think gets to your point.
Vice Chair Dickinson.
Thank you very much. Couple just brief answers to these questions. So the WEDC grant, is there a possibility to accept it, as Chris had said, turn it into a county facility, and then kind of shuttle off portions of that and still be within the terms of the grant? Is there a threshold of time or something? Because you said it was quicker to do maybe a county facility first.
I think it was a need that Fond du Lac County had been looking at, and so it was sort of a nice dovetailing of things, even though they lost the campus. So that was higher on their list in terms of, oh, this is something we could do, and then utilize the funds to do that. As in terms of combining the different approaches with the grant funding or applying them here and not there, I don't know the answer to that question yet, but it's one that I plan on asking from at the state level to kind of get some feedback as to how they would view it, because that would open the door to is it all or nothing, or is it different pieces, that kind of thing. So it's a great question, and would certainly make the conversation easier, I think, if it was allowable.
Thank you. I have like 3. Second question, so the decision, you're talking about the internal or external direction, is that going to be a decision for these 2 committees, or is that going to come to the full board?
I haven't thought about what your rules require as a practical matter. I think this is a big enough decision. My hope would be the full board talks about it, because at the end of the day, the decision of whether you sell property is a full board decision, not an HR, finance and property, or extension, education, economic development committee decision.
Okay, thank you. The West Side Master Plan, how does that play into this, if at all? Understanding that, we have this kind of development situation potentially for the Marathon County Park with the ice rink, et cetera. Is that part of this, or is there kind of like a wall that we're going to do on RFP for the campus, but we're going to keep it over here, or is that within the conversation or no?
It depends. The short answer is your last West Side Master Plan. The green space, this is a hyper-specific example, but it was part of the West Side Master Plan for that green space to be future academic space. I don't think anyone envisions that to be the case now. So we can take a look at the West Side Master Plan. That's a great question. If there's an opportunity for the board to kind of take another fresh look at it. I know the board wants to do that. My sense is the board wants to do that with kind of the discussions that you've had as a board relative to the highway facility anyway. So yeah, we can put that on the list of things to pull up and see what the interplay is. Again, the West Side Master Plan is that vision document. So just hypothetically, if that master plan had something going on the academic in the UW space, it certainly doesn't bind the board. You can always revise that and make changes.
I just have one more and then I'm done. So the last thought is, I agree that government should not be a landlord unless it's a very specific kind of endeavor. So if, I'll throw it out there, a Marathon County Arts Center, take it and run with it, potentially, where there is a very kind of limited scope of what we're trying to do. And I say that because I very much appreciate everyone who came here and spoke, because we had the homelessness task force actually was in the theater. There was a school board forum years ago that I was a part of, being a school board member, which it's a very important space. And as someone who has a daughter who dances at UW Stevens Point at the main campus and the Jenkins Theater and what that brings to the community, I certainly appreciate the comments about what it does here for this community as well, and certainly be very supportive of that. And then I have some other kids who do music and painting and such. So thank you for that, and I'll just leave it at that.
Miranda, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I can answer one question about the WDC grant because Marshfield and Wood County are going through the process of applying for it now. They did get confirmation from WDC that you can use the grant for one part of a campus and not the entire thing. Because I know that they're getting pretty far in that process now and are looking at their auditorium, but not the rest of the building.
Thank you for that. And then we've got Vice Chair Fifrick and on deck Supervisor Poole.
Thank you, Chair. And looking at the proposal, and thank everybody for all the work putting together, everybody for coming out today. What we have in front of us, I think it makes sense to move forward with that internal request for proposals. Gives us an opportunity to see what's out there. I think getting it well publicized, seeing what's out there. Maybe we have something that comes forward and everything's filled up. I highly doubt that's going to happen. But it gives us the opportunity, instead of putting the planning money up front, that we can see what's out there in the community, what the interest is, and then utilize all of that branch campus redevelopment grant for implementation. That would be very helpful in moving around. Obviously, not every facility is going to be tailor-made. There might be some requirements or requests to, I'll say, refurbish or redevelop some of the spaces. Obviously, the Marathon Hall has been something we've talked about for a long time. And I think that's definitely would need work in whatever sense we do, whether that's a demolition or some type of refurbishment of that, which would be probably taking up to $2 million alone if you wanted to bring life back to that existing building. But I like the idea, like I said, of going to internal requests for proposals. We can, within that, come up with some guidelines for how it's going to be reviewed. I think we have the perfect process for that, and that we're going to have public open meetings on our discussions of moving that forward. I don't know exactly how that works in terms of what committees or if we would do a joint meeting, but gives us an opportunity to see what's out there and move the process forward. Thank you.
Supervisor Poole.
I was just thinking in terms of timeline, we should also be looking at the entities that are currently sharing space. They're going to need a long kind of ramp to figure out what they want to do. July 30th is going to be coming sooner than we think, and I think the sooner we get this done, the better, so that gives them time to make plans for themselves as well. Just something to keep in mind.
So with that in mind, could we impose upon administration to develop a timeline, best case scenario, and perhaps an alternative timeline if things don't work out? But again, I think there are a lot of reasons why we need to make a decision soon, because we need to know how we're going to budget in 2027 for that campus from a county perspective, if we own all or portions of it. So could you work on a schedule? So if we go, perhaps if you could do that internal as Supervisor Pfeffer just discussed, that timeline versus an external party, and I kind of like his approach.
Sure, we can do that. I think Supervisor Poole's comments, and I think your comments as well, Chair Robinson, get at kind of the second question under my potential timeline heading. I know the university, as Miranda said, their fiscal year is different, so they're ending in July, so they're giving that notice to all of those entities, hey, we're not scheduling beyond that date, which I fully appreciate. To many that are in the back of the room is concerning. That said, even if you want to, the county's making and going down the path of redevelopment, and it might even mean that all of those entities, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but even if they can't be there come January 1 of 27, you still have from July through the end of December to provide that longer off-ramp, but I need your direction to do that. So what I interpret your direction to do is to put together a timeline for an internal RFP for the broader redevelopment, but also give some thought, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but give some thought to what it might look like to provide, if nothing else, at the bare minimum, that additional 6 months of off-ramp. We can work on doing that, and I think we're going to need to have, if I can pull on you, Miranda, after the meeting to talk about what that might look like from the UW side, because quite honestly, you guys are very well positioned. I'm just thinking of Chris Berge, continuing him to do what he's doing during that off-ramp period, if it comes to the off-ramp. So if that I understand your direction correctly, I think we can do that.
Supervisor Pfeffer.
And I agree. I think that's very important that, they're talking about bookings and everything like that, and we're only a little over 7 months away from July of next year. So those things are coming up, and I know that's important in their world. Having touring the Civic Engagement Center recently, the facility's great, and what they've got going there is really great for the community. So more we can do to support those partners is great, is what we should be doing.
So I think in coming on that discussion is we need to know, and I think this may be particular to the Center for Civic Engagement building, of what are the commitments beyond July 1st or whatever a date certain for that rest of the calendar year in terms of staffing and access, and what stays and what goes, because I think that'll be critical for how we would approach that interim period. So I think the better clarification we have on timing of things would be helpful.
Understood.
So we are meeting today jointly, and I'm just looking for that path forward. We have a quorum of both committees, but we're approaching the holiday season, which makes it difficult to get together, but I think there are some critical discussions that need to take place soon. So do we want to look at another joint meeting, and when would that be? Would we want to just do the EEEDC meeting in December, that first Thursday in December, as sort of the next meeting, so people have an understanding of what our timeline is? And would that give you enough time, given the budget is consuming a lot of time over the next week, to pull together all that information?
Budget has to be done on Tuesday, so, yeah, we'll have more time after that for sure. So, I think December 4th, in all honesty, I don't have concerns about getting the information and putting together the timelines that you laid out. If you guys push the budget beyond Tuesday, you're gonna cause me a lot more stress than getting that information.
I think it's a good idea.
So why don't we plan for that, and if you could just note that? And if you needed a meeting, we could come in at 4. We could structure, we'll work on the details.
Are we ready to move on?
Anything else? Any other questions? All right, we have a process, so we will meet again on December 4th and try to get some clarification on some of those points. Thank you. Thank you all for your attendance. You're welcome to stay for the next discussion, which may be material, because it's our template approach to redevelopment. So Administrator Leonard.
Sure, I can kick us off, but I really can't take credit for this. Erin Andrews is in the back. She worked with facilities staff to compile a lot of great examples from other municipalities and our own RFPs, and put together, as you said, Chair Robinson, what we hope is going to serve as a template that we can use for quite a number of facilities that the county has the opportunity to redevelop or divest. So the template before you is for the Thomas Street property, the former social services building. And again, Aaron did a great job working with Chris and his team on this. It's essentially taking what you had previously seen with the residence hall, the dormitory, and tailoring it to the Thomas Street location. We incorporated a lot of the feedback, all of the feedback that the committees provided during some previous meetings. But again, the goal here is to really solicit a broad range of individual proposers and uses. Of course, there may be, given the specific uses for the campus that we just got done talking about, if we do want to tailor it to the WEDC criteria, any individual template is going to, any individual document would be tweaked, but this is really that idea of how do we broadly solicit proposals from as many entities as possible. That's why we left language in based on previous conversations with this, each of these committees about if people want to, if an entity wants to buy a property, great. If, however, their proposal is to enter into a long-term lease, we left that in there despite, as I shared before, my general hesitance to serve as landlord. I will do whatever the board wants to do, but that's the document as it's laid out. Of course, the timelines that are in there, again, we need to flesh those out. But that's the thought on it. On this specific proposal, one of the things I know that a number of you have asked me before is what's the status of the credit union? As of right now, we understand that the credit union has acquired a property that it wants to use for its future location, and that their intent is to move out of that facility in summer of '26. Why that's important is, again, that really would be, as soon as they're out, you could arguably, an entity could fully take possession and occupy the space and utilize it. The other additional challenge, I shouldn't say right away, because we have one additional challenge. We do need to pull equipment out of there, specifically IT equipment. The credit union is currently served by IT equipment that not only runs to Thomas Street, to that location, but it runs through River Drive, and we can't decommission the IT infrastructure on River Drive until Thomas Street is no longer requiring of that IT infrastructure. So that's a bit of background, really hoping just today to get your feedback. Does it look good? I don't know, Aaron, if there's anything, feel free to step up to the mic, and if there's anything you want to add, or Chris, relative to the RFP. But again, the goal is to put together a good template, because you do have a number of facilities, Thomas Street, River Drive, and now the UW campus is certainly going to be more complex than this one, but we don't want to recreate the wheel every time we have to do one of these.
So Supervisor or Vice Chair of HR Finance and Property, Marshall had communicated some concerns, and she requested that in the evaluation criteria that the expected quality of proposed work be replaced with property taxes, and that she also wanted to remove the long-term lease language. Chair Gibbs is at a WCA meeting, and he wanted to keep the long-term lease language as an option in case we had poor or low offers, to keep it on the table. So I think that, the issue is there a preference? I think the preference would be to divest the property, but if it is in the county's long-term financial interest to do a long-term lease, that it be considered. But that I personally would like, a couple of things in there is we seem to, we look for the developer's experience in residential and commercial projects. I think we want to make that in redevelopment projects, because there may be a manufacturing component and not limited to that. And I also think that the evaluation criteria needs to look at neighborhood and community priorities and interests, which is not reflected in the current draft, but should be consistent with, it's discussed earlier, but is not in the evaluation criteria.
If I can, I don't want to stifle conversation. I've taken those points down. I should have said, again, as I referenced when we talked about the university property, at the end of the day, I don't foresee, unless the board directs me otherwise, that staff would be the people that are ultimately making the decision on which proposal to select here, which is fundamentally different than how the county does all of its other RFPs. When we're selecting a vendor to do a piece of work, so when Chris and his team are, we just did an RFP. Chris led the RFP for the selection of the construction manager at risk relative to the potential highway shop project. we don't engage the committees or the board on that. This is, in my mind, this is different because it ends up with a requirement at the end of the day where the board is going to have to approve if it is divestment or a lease, you're going to have to give direction for us to go in a certain direction. So I see much more engagement throughout that process. So the fact that we want to capture all the criteria, but I want to make sure, at least until you tell me to do something else, my sense is that some members of the board or the full board throughout the process would be involved.
Well, I want to, thank administration and Aaron for developing this. I think it's a great starting point for our discussions moving forward. And with that, are there questions or comments or thoughts, Supervisor Limmer?
Yeah, I would also like to say, I think, to keep it as open as possible with different options of having maybe a nonprofit come in with the different cuts and stuff happening at the federal level. I know many of our nonprofit friends are needing support with rent and things, and if the county can provide something like that, and it fits a need in our strategic plan, whatever, I would hate to take them out just because they wouldn't qualify for a property tax thing. So if there's a way to word it so that it's more open, I would appreciate that.
I'm assuming that neither the River Drive property or this Thomas Street property is not in any TIDs or TIFs.
This isn't. River Drive probably is. Yeah, this property wouldn't be, that I could think of. Trying to go off a mental map, which is kind of dangerous at times.
There's a lot of them out there. It's hard to keep track.
I think talking about some of the different points brought up, keeping it open-ended, my preference would be to see us sell this property. At the same time, if we get a proposal that makes sense for a long-term lease, I don't think we want to, at this point, we're trying to gather in as many ideas as we can get so we can evaluate them to see what is the best fit for the county. Overall, I think the RFP is very comprehensive. Seeing that they only get 15 pages, we may need to bump that up a little bit based on everything we're asking for as part of this. I like keeping short proposals because otherwise you get a lot of fluff included in there. So maybe just evaluating that a little bit. If we feel like we can get what we want from that, that's great. But overall, I think it looks good.
I can speak to the 15-page limit. That was a conversation I had with Troy about keeping it limited, but that we could allow for addendums to provide additional information. So it keeps the actual proposal simple, but they have to, if they have additional information, they can put it in an addendum. And I think we put that into the document so that it gives them that option. But if it isn't in there, I'll make sure it is.
Yeah, I think that's important. It just sometimes you get firms that want to put a 4-page resume for everybody on their team in there, which really isn't necessary to what we're trying to get from this, so.
Supervisor Hagan?
I would tend to lean toward non-leasing just because I looked at that list of the proposed work at the Stevens Point University over the next few years. You need quite a lease payment to cover all of that. So we kind of inherit a lot of problems if we stick with some of those buildings too. Just my comment.
Any other comments? I think this is still a work in progress. I think you were looking for input. You have that, and if you could.
Yeah, I think so. I think thank you for the conversation. Next steps for us. I think we'll make some slight tweaks and come back maybe with a document that has some actual times in it for when it would be released. We'll try to engage the credit union to really better understand their plans because, I'll just be very candid. If they have, my understanding is they have construction that needs to happen at their new location, and we all know the dependencies that sometimes come up with construction and some of the unforeseen things that can push back timelines. So we need to make sure we craft the RFP that, in a way that I think preserves that relationship as well.
If not, then perhaps we could have that at the joint meeting as well on the 4th. All right. That would take us to item C, update on the 2028 annual budget with respect to departments and organizations over which the committee has jurisdiction. We've had the public hearing, and are there any other issues or concerns or amendments to the budget? The infrastructure met earlier today.
Yeah, we'll have a budget coming from infrastructure from the meeting this morning in regards to some general transportation aid that came in higher than anticipated. We have a culvert project in, remember the municipality?
It's on Springbrook, over Springbrook Creek. It runs on County Highway H.
So, so there was some shortfall after doing some additional investigation into that. The project appears that it's going to be more expensive than originally was, but thankfully for that general transportation aid, that should be able to fill the gap in that project. It's also important when we're talking about that for general transportation aid, keeping up that 6-year average, so that we want to ensure that we're continuing and getting as much from general transportation aid in the future as possible. Thank you.
Any other items? If not, that takes us to item 5. We'll need a separate motion per committee, so if you want.
A motion from Triple E. We've got a motion from Vice Chair Pfeiffer, a second from Supervisor Hagan. Any discussion? No? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, for Human Resources, Finance, and Property, what are the wishes? Moved by Supervisor Lemmer, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Supervisor Poole. All those in favor of adjournment will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no? Thank you. We'll make you an honorary member.
It's been a long day.